Hi Flashes, so here is the second part of your guys' notes. So this is the back side of the notes page. So number 2 says graph and label each number on the number line below. You may label the number with a letter. Okay, so like we talked about yesterday, is if you can change any of these to decimals, you need to change it to a decimal first, because that's just going to be the easiest on where it's going to go on the number line. If you have square roots, try to see if it's a perfect square root to make it into a whole number. And then if it's not a perfect square root, then you need to figure out, okay, where does this square root fall in between what two perfect squares? Okay, so I know Ms. Collins and myself have been harshing to you guys about making your number line into the square root number line. You don't have to worry about the negatives, only have to worry about this side over here. So if you were to like find your perfect squares, remember you're just taking the number times itself. So 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16, and 5 times 5 is 25. So I highly recommend that you guys do this on your quiz to help you guys figure out, hopefully a little bit easier, where the non-perfect square roots would fall. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So here we have 0.75. This is already a decimal, so we don't need to do anything to it. We just need to figure out where does it go on the number line. Well, 0.75, since there's no ones number in the 1 spot, that means that it's not going to have a whole number, which means that it is less than 1. So on my number line, I'm going to find 1, and I know that 0.75 is going to be less than 1, but it's also greater than 0, because 0.75 is pretty much saying 75 cents. So it's not fully a dollar, but it's also greater than 0. So this is where the 0.75 would fall. Next one is square root of 3. So again, you have to first figure out, is this a perfect square root? And you can even use these numbers down here to help you. So do we see the square root of 3 anywhere? No, we do not, because there's no number times itself that would give us 3. So we need to approximate where the square root of 3 is going to fall. Well, if you guys look, we have the square root of 1 and the square root of 4, so we know that the square root of 3 has to be somewhere between here. So if I look at my number line, the square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2, so I know that my square root of 3 is going to be a number between 1 and 2. So you guys just have to put it somewhere in this area. I do not care where it's at. If you put it in the middle, that's perfect. Okay, it just has to be in between 1 and 2 there. So that's the square root of 3. Next one is the square root of 9. So is that a perfect square root? Is there any number times itself that would give us 9? There is. It is 3. So the square root of 9, 3 times 3 gives us 9. So C is the same thing as the whole number 3. And if you guys notice, we did label that down here on our number line. So all that you guys have to do is put a dot at 3 and label that C. Alright, next one is negative 2 1/2. So we do need to change this into a decimal because it will be easier for us to graph it. So remember, you don't have to worry about the whole number, you just need to worry about the fraction. So if I were to take 1 divided by 2 up here at the top, notice how 2 does not go into 1. So remember, what you do is you add the decimal point and the 0, so that now 2 goes into 10 5 times. And that would give us our remainder of 0. So 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5. So you just have to add your whole number there. So negative 2 1/2 is the same thing as negative 2.5. Now, since it is negative, a lot of students get a little bit confused when the halves come into play. So I always tell my students to start at 0 and look at that whole number. So that whole number is negative 2, so you're going to follow the number line to negative 2, and then you still have half a more to go. So if you still have half a more to go, you're just going to go a little bit more to the left, halfway, And then that is where negative 2.5 is going to go. So that is letter D. Okay. Next one, negative 15 over 10. So this is a fraction, so I do want to change it to its decimal form first. So I'm just going to do this off to the side. I'm going to take 15 divided by 10. 10 goes into 15 one time. However, I do have a remainder. So if 10 does not go into 5, remember you add your decimal point and that 0, and I go ahead and move up my decimal point up there at the top. So then I can bring down that 0, and 10 goes into 50 5 times. And that's when I finally get my remainder of 0. So negative 15 over 10 is the same thing as negative 1.5. Negative 1.5. Okay. So once again, if it's negative 1.5 and it's in the negative, start at 0. Follow it to 1. So follow it to negative 1. And then you still have half a more to go. So you go halfway. And this is where negative 1.5 is going to go. So that's letter E. All right, next one is 2.6 repeating. So this is already a decimal, so I don't need to change it. Notice how 2.6 is a little bit more than 2.5, because if I were to write down 2.5, 2.6, notice how 6 is bigger than 5, so it's a little bit more than the halfway mark, but it's still in between 2 and 3. So again, you're going to start at 0, follow it to the whole number, and then follow it to its decimal. So if it's 0.6, it's just a little bit more than halfway, so it's going to be about right here. So that's F. And then our last one is this pi symbol. Remember, pi is the same thing as 3.14. So that's a decimal, so I don't need to change it. You're going to follow it to 3, and then 0.14 is just barely past 3, so I'm going to keep it close to that other point, and then this is where G is going to be located. All right, and that's how you plot your numbers on the number line, okay? The last part of this back page is just some more ordering, so write the following numbers in order from least to greatest. Once again, you always want to change them to decimals first, and always change the square roots to its whole numbers or where they fall in between. So let's see here. So negative 1 is already a whole number, so I'm going to leave it as negative 1. 2 1/4 is a fraction, so I do need to change it to its decimal form. So remember, you're just going to take 1 divided by 4 to figure out what this is going to be. 4 cannot go into 1, so this is when you add your decimal point and a 0. So that then 4 goes into 10 2 times. If 4 cannot go into 2, just add your 0 again. So 4 goes into 25 times, and then you finally get that remainder of 0. So 2 1/4 is the same thing as 2.25. Okay. 0.25 is already a decimal, so I'm going to leave that. Next one is negative square root of 16. So is 16, the square root of 16, a perfect square root? Is there any number times itself that would give us 16? And hopefully you guys are thinking yes, because the number 4 is. And then since there's that negative sign out front, instead of it being a positive 4, it's just going to be a negative 4. And then the square root of 15, you're trying to figure out, once again, is it a perfect square? Is there any number times itself that would give us 15? And in this case, it's no. So you need to figure out, where does the square root of 15 fall in between what two perfect squares? So if I go back up here to my number line, the square root of 15 would be approximately right here, a little bit closer to the square root of 16. a little bit closer to the square root of 16. So I know for sure that the square root of 15 is going to be a number between 3 and 4. So I'm just going to write between 3 and 4. After you have this, now you can start ordering your numbers. So look at your negatives first. Is -1 or -4 the smallest here? It's -4. Remember, the more left you go, that's the least. So -4 is the smallest number, which means that that was the negative square root of 16. So I'm going to cross those out. Then my only other negative that I have left is -1, so I know for sure that that's going to go next. Cross that out. Next, I have 2.25, 0.25, and a number between 3 and 4. So notice how 2.25 and 3 and 4 are whole numbers. This 0.25 has no whole number. So that is going to be our next smallest number because this is only a quarter. And then I'm just going to start looking at the whole numbers. So this is 2.25, and this is a number between 3 and 4. So since 2 is less than 3 and 4, my next number is going to be that 2 1/4, which means my very last number, the biggest number, is going to be that square root of 15. Okay? All right, and the last one. So again, try to change any fractions to decimals, try to change any square roots to its whole number or between the two whole consecutive numbers, and try and figure it out that way. So 100 is going to stay 100. We don't want to change that. The square root of 100, there is a number times itself that gives us 100, so this is a perfect square root, and that number is 10. Next one is -1/2, so that's 2 quarters. So in other words, that is 50 cents. So I'm going to change this -1/2 to -50 or 0.50. Next one is -0.10, so that's going to stay the same. And then the last one is the square root of 2. So the square root of 2 is not a perfect square root. So I'm just trying to figure out what two numbers will the square root of 2 fall in between. And as you guys can see, it's going to fall right here between the perfect squares and square root of 1 and square root of 4. So I know for sure that the square root of 2 is going to be a decimal between 1 and 2. So I'm just going to write 1 to 2. Okay, so numbering orders from least to greatest, always start with the negatives if there are any. So here we have -0.50 and -0.10. So if you don't know which one's the least, line them up. So we have 0.50 and 0.10. And just start working your way in the first section. So here's the tenths place. Is 5 or 1 greater? Hopefully you guys said that 5 is greater. So this means that -50 is going to be less than -10. So this -1/2 is going to be your first number. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and move on to our other negative, which was that -0.10. So we know for sure that's going to be next. And now we can just start looking at our other numbers. So here we have 100, here we have 10, and here we have a number between 1 and 2. So hopefully you guys realize that this square root of 2 is going to be our next number, because this is going to be like 1.1, so that is definitely less than 10 and 100. So this is going to be the square root of 2. And then our only other numbers that we have left is 10 and 100, so we know that 10 is less than 100, so that will be next. Root of 100, and then that last number that we need is just the 100 itself. Okay. So does it take some time? Yes, it does, but as you guys can see, once we changed everything to decimals, or once we changed everything to whole numbers or the non-perfect square roots, trying to figure out where it's between, it makes this so much easier. Okay, so just take your time to change everything into the easier numbers to figure out where does it go on the number line, or where does it go from least to greatest, so that it makes it so much easier for you guys, okay? So just let your guys' teacher know if you guys have any questions, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.